A few years ago, I worked as a delivery driver for different pizza places and had a lot of strange and weird experiences, especially at night. But one night stands out as the creepiest and strangest. I worked at this pizza place for almost a year, doing midday and night shifts. Most nights, I worked with just one other person, and we stayed busy until closing time at 2 a.m., so there wasn't much time to take it easy. I'll call my coworker Tom to keep his privacy. Tom was a few years older than me, quiet, and a very hard worker. He was the one in charge during the night shifts, making all the pizzas while I delivered them. We both answered calls when we could, depending on who was free. It was just after 11 p.m. I got back from a delivery and the phone rang. Tom was busy making a pizza, so I picked it up. A man on the other end asked for a large sausage pizza. I put in the order and asked if he wanted anything else. He didn't reply right away, then said again that he wanted a large sausage pizza. This time, I could tell from his slurred voice that he was probably drunk. I double-checked if he only wanted one pizza, and he said yes. I sent the order through, grabbed my next delivery, and went out to drop it off. When I got back to the shop, Tom had already finished making the guy's pizza and set it up for delivery. I picked it up and headed to my car. As I grabbed the order, I noticed Tom looking at me strangely, wanting to say something but changing his mind. But since Tom was usually quiet, I didn't think much of it. The delivery address was about 15 minutes away, and with no traffic, I got there pretty quickly. The house looked normal, but it was surrounded by a lot of open land, with the nearby houses barely visible through the trees. I got out of the car, went to the passenger side to grab the pizza, then walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, a man opened the door wide. It wasn't super strange, but I always thought it was a bit odd when people opened their doors so wide like that. His face looked confused and surprised when he saw me, almost like he wasn't expecting me. Thinking he was probably just drunk, I handed him the pizza box and told him the total. He handed me cash slowly and awkwardly without saying a word. He just stood there, holding the pizza and staring at it in a really strange way. Then, the man looked up, but not directly at me. Instead, he stared over my shoulder, like he was watching something behind me. He had the same intense look, and then he slowly shook his head, almost like he was saying no. Feeling uncomfortable, I couldn't help but turn around to see what he was looking at. I glanced over my shoulder toward the driveway, and a few feet from my car, I saw a hooded man running back toward the trees. My heart raced, and I felt frozen, trying to process what was happening. I quickly turned back to the man at the door, but he had already stepped back and slammed the door shut. It all happened so fast, in just a few seconds, leaving me no time to react. When I looked back at the hooded man, he had already disappeared into the dark tree line. I stumbled off the porch and ran back to my car, backing out of the driveway as quickly as I could and driving back to work. During the drive, I tried to calm myself down, but I still couldn't figure out what had happened. When I got back, I told Tom about it, but he didn't react much. He just told me to get the next delivery when I was ready. I did what he said, but on my way back from that delivery, I pulled over and called the police to let them know, just in case. They told me they'd send an officer to check it out and would call me back with an update. An hour later, I got a call, and after work, I waited in the parking lot for the police to show up and talk to me. When the officer came to my car, he said he had spoken to the man at the house who matched the description I gave. The guy told the officer he was just waiting for his friend Tom to show up since he knew Tom worked at the pizza shop. But when the officer asked him about the hooded man, he didn't give any details and claimed he didn't know or see anyone. Hearing that only made me more scared and confused. I started thinking that maybe they'd called expecting Tom to deliver the pizza, and were planning to jump him. That would explain the hooded man near my car and the surprised look on the guy's face when he saw me instead. I also kept remembering that strange look Tom gave me. Maybe he'd wanted to warn me about something. I asked Tom about it several times afterward, but he always gave short, unhelpful answers, just saying the guy was an old friend and that he didn't know anything else. Not long after, I left to work at a different pizza shop. Now that it's all in the past and I don't feel personally threatened, I sometimes try to figure out what happened. I still don't know for sure, but it was the weirdest and creepiest experience I've ever had. During COVID, delivering groceries became very popular, and even after that, many people kept having them delivered to their homes. I worked as a picker for those orders, and when we were short on staff, which was pretty much all the time, I also delivered them. It wasn't a bad job. I liked driving to people's homes. I got to see nice houses, and I didn't have to answer a lot of questions from customers, so I was happy. Sometimes I even got tips, which was nice. Most of the time, I just left the groceries at the doorstep, took a picture for proof, and then left. But there were times when I got to meet the people and help them bring in the groceries. One time, I delivered groceries to an older lady from Serbia named Vesna, and she liked me. We got to know each other because every Thursday, she would order pretty much the same things delivered at the same time. At first, when I dropped off her groceries, she never came outside, but I would see her peeking out the window at me. I'd give her a little wave, take my picture, and then get back in the truck to leave. I think once she realized it was the same person delivering her groceries each time, she felt more comfortable. She came out to greet me, and over time, I started bringing her groceries inside and setting them on her counters. She was quite old, so I was happy to help, and she tipped nicely too. The more I visited her, the better I got to know her. She was recently widowed and lived alone. All her children lived far away, and she only saw them once or twice a year during the holidays when she could take the train. She was also retired, but she used to be a broker, which explained her nice house. I always looked forward to Thursdays, and this day was no different. She had ordered everything on Monday, just like she always did, and I was dropping it off the following Thursday. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed right away that something was wrong. She wasn't at the door like usual, but the door was open. I also saw that all her blinds were closed, which was strange because she always kept them open to let sunlight in for her plants. I walked up to the open front door and rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I waited for a bit, then knocked a few times, but still got no response. I started to feel worried. Since she was old, I thought maybe she had fallen or had a heart attack or something like that. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I thought about going inside, but I was also on the job, and I knew the rules said if no one answered, I should just leave the groceries on the porch. However, since I considered her a friend, I decided it would be best to go inside and at least put her groceries on the counter like I usually did. After all, the door was open. I grabbed all the bags with both hands and walked straight into the kitchen. The lights were off, and everything was quiet. I placed the bags on her counter and called out her name again, but there was still no response. As I started to walk out, I thought about calling the police, but I wasn't sure how to explain that this was an emergency. What if she was just out of the house? Maybe she was visiting someone, and I would be wasting the police officer's time. I felt uncertain, but I just knew something was wrong. Just as I reached the doorway leading outside, I heard some movement coming from upstairs. I felt relieved for a moment and called out for Vesna, but again, there was no response. No one came to the door or answered me. After standing there for a minute, I kept hearing shuffling noises like someone was moving things around upstairs, and I started to feel awkward and uncomfortable. So, I went back outside and got into my car. I sat there for a little while, and after a minute, I saw the curtains on the second floor move to the side, as if someone was looking at me through the window. I pulled out, drove around the corner, and parked on the street, feeling confused. I didn't know if it was Vesna, and she just didn't want to see anyone, or maybe it was one of her kids. I was also worried about whether or not I should call the police. I drove off, went around the block, and then decided to drive by her house again. I sat there for a bit until I saw the upstairs curtains open. A male figure looked out and then quickly closed the curtains, as if my truck had scared him. I knew Vesna had 2 daughters and a son, but he had passed away years ago, so I wasn't sure who could be at her house when she wasn't there. I kept wondering where she could be. I realized I had been there too long, so I had to get back to work. The following week, there were no orders from her for the first time in almost a year. After I got off work on Thursday, I drove by her house and saw a police car in the driveway. When I got home, I searched for her name and found out that she had been reported missing just a few days after I delivered her groceries. I saw that the date they said she was last at home was the day after she ordered the groceries 2 days before I went to her house and saw that man. I took all the information I had to the police. I don't know who that man was or if I was close to something bad happening to me, but it's been nearly 3 years now, and there haven't been any updates. I was driving around on Sunday nights to earn extra money with DoorDash and Uber Eats. My friend taught me how to use both apps together to earn more money each hour. One big problem with delivery services is that there is a lot of waiting time when you just drive around, hoping to get an order. But if you use both apps at the same time, you can avoid that waiting and keep making money all the time. I was doing this for a few hours, driving back and forth between houses and restaurants, when I got a small order from a restaurant nearby. The house was far away, and these kinds of orders are usually the worst because you drive a long way, but get paid less. However, this order had a big payment, which probably meant the tip would be huge. I decided to take it, picked up the order, and started the 25-minute drive to their house. Halfway through the drive, while I was on a side road, I got a call from the app, probably from the customer. I answered and asked if this was my Uber Eats order. A man said yes and apologized a lot. He told me he ordered from his friend's account, but forgot to change the address. He said his house was very close by and gave me directions with a couple of turns to take when I got to the friend's house. I asked him for the address, just in case I got lost, but he said I would see him outside, waiting for me, and then hung up. This was not normal. But since I was more than halfway there, I decided to trust the man. It seemed possible that he could forget to change the address from his friend's house. I also thought that being a bigger guy made me feel less worried about going through with the delivery. When I got to the friend's house, I followed the turns the man had given me and drove down a dark street until I saw a no outlet sign, which meant the road ended a little farther down. I felt sure I had followed the directions right, so I pulled over and took out my phone to call the customer. Just as I was about to call, I heard a knock on my driver's window, which startled me. A little embarrassed at how surprised I was, I rolled down the window to say hi, but when I looked up at the man, his face was blank with no expression at all. I let go of the window button and quickly pressed the lock button. Suddenly, the man stuck a gun through the half-open window right at my head and yelled something. I heard more voices behind him, and then a group of people ran up to my car, trying to open the doors. They were all shouting commands at each other, but I couldn't understand what they were saying because I was in shock, staring at the gun. There were at least 5 or 6 people around my car. At that moment, I didn't even have any thoughts. It felt like a reflex. When the man with the gun looked away for just a second, I slammed on the gas and sped down the street. I was surprised the man managed to keep holding his gun as he pulled his hand out of the window just in time. But when I saw the end of the road, I quickly did a 3-point turn. When I turned back onto the street, they were all gone. There wasn't a single person on the road, sidewalk, or near the houses. They must have run away the moment I started driving. As soon as I got out of the neighborhood, I called 911. These kinds of gang attacks happen around here, but I never thought it would happen to me. Even though nothing came of it and nobody was found, I see this event as a wake-up call for me. I realized that when the man put a gun to my head, being a big and confident guy didn't matter at all. Taking a risk like that was foolish, because anyone with a weapon can have your life in their hands in a moment. If you work a job like this or do anything where you meet strangers often, be careful getting into a risky situation with someone you don't know could be the last thing you ever do.